Sarah Elena
Everyone, focus. This
Martinez
is the
was
moment.
born into a
Understood.
world that had
Ready when
already
you are.
decided what she couldn't do. In the dusty town of Marfa, Texas, population 1,800, the closest thing to excitement was watching tumbleweeds race across Highway 90. Her father, Miguel, worked double shifts at the local ranch, his hands cracked and weathered from years of honest labor. Her mother, Rosa, cleaned houses for the wealthy families on the hill, returning home each evening with stories of lives so different from their own they might as well have been fairy tales. The Martinez family lived in a small adobe house that Miguel had built himself, one room at a time, whenever he could scrape together enough money for supplies. Sarah's bedroom was barely large enough for a twin bed and a wooden dresser that Miguel had rescued from the dump and carefully restored. The walls were decorated with pictures she'd torn from old magazines, images of faraway places she'd never been, people doing jobs she'd never heard of, and, most prominently, a photograph of Annie Oakley that she'd found in a library book about the American West. From the age of 7, Sarah knew she was different. While other girls in her class played with dolls and dreamed of wedding dresses, Sarah spent her afternoons exploring the vast desert landscape that surrounded Marfa. She would disappear for hours, returning home with her clothes dusty and her eyes bright with adventure. Rosa worried constantly, but Miguel saw something in his daughter that reminded him of his own restless spirit, the one he'd buried under the weight of responsibility and limited opportunities. The first sign of Sarah's extraordinary gift came during a family camping trip when she was 9 years old. Miguel had brought along his grandfather's old .22 rifle, a weathered weapon that had been passed down through 3 generations. He intended to teach Sarah's older brother, Carlos, how to shoot tin cans off fence posts. But Carlos was more interested in his Game Boy than learning what he called boring old man stuff. Sarah watched from a distance as Miguel set up the targets, her small hands itching to hold the rifle. When Carlos wandered off to explore a creek bed, Sarah approached her father with the kind of quiet determination that would later become her trademark. "Papa, can I try?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the desert wind. Miguel hesitative. His traditional upbringing told him that guns were for boys, that teaching his daughter to shoot would only encourage dangerous ideas about what women could and couldn't do. But something in Sarah's eyes, a focus and intensity that seemed far beyond her years, made him reconsider. "It's not a toy, Mija," he said, kneeling down to meet her at eye level. "This is a serious responsibility." "I know, Papa. I won't treat it like a toy." Miguel spent the next 30 minutes teaching Sarah the fundamentals, how to hold the rifle properly, how to line up the sights, how to control her breathing, how to squeeze the trigger slowly and steadily. She absorbed every word like a sponge, asking thoughtful questions that surprised him with their sophistication. When Sarah finally took her first shot, the tin can exploded off the fence post as if it had been struck by lightning. Miguel stared in disbelief. Beginner's luck, he thought. But then Sarah hit the second can, and the third, and the fourth. Out of 10 shots, she missed only once, and that was because a sudden gust of wind knocked her off balance. "Dios mío," Miguel whispered, crossing himself. "Where did you learn to do that?" "I don't know, Papa. It just feels right." That evening around the campfire, Miguel told Rosa what had happened. She listened with growing concern, not because she doubted her husband's story, but because she knew what it might mean for their daughter's future. In their small community, exceptional talents in young women were often seen as problems to be solved rather than gifts to be nurtured. "Promise me something, Miguel," Rosa said, her voice tight with worry. "Promise me you won't encourage this. Sarah needs to focus on her studies, on becoming a teacher or a nurse. Something safe, something normal." Miguel nodded, but his heart wasn't in the promise. He'd seen something in Sarah that afternoon that transcended gender roles and social expectations. She had a gift, a natural ability that appeared perhaps once in a generation. The question that kept him awake that night wasn't whether she should develop this talent, but whether he had the right to deny her the opportunity. For the next 3 years, Miguel honored his promise to Rosa, at least on the surface. But every few months, when Rosa visited her sister in El Paso, Miguel would take Sarah out to the desert for what they called nature walks. These walks inevitably led to impromptu shooting lessons using cans, bottles, and eventually more challenging targets that Miguel would set up at increasingly difficult distances. Sarah's skill grew exponentially. By age 12, she could consistently hit targets at distances that challenged experienced hunters. More importantly, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to read environmental conditions, wind patterns, temperature variations, even subtle changes in air pressure that could affect a bullet's trajectory. Miguel, who considered himself a decent marksman, found himself learning from his daughter. Their secret remained safe until the day Carlos accidentally mentioned it to a friend, who mentioned it to his father, who happened to be the local sheriff. Sheriff Tom Bradley was a reasonable man, but he was also responsible for public safety in a county where everyone knew everyone else's business. When he heard that Miguel Martinez was teaching his 12-year-old daughter to shoot with unnatural accuracy, he felt obligated to investigate. The conversation between Miguel and Sheriff Bradley took place on a Tuesday evening in the Martinez family kitchen. Rosa served coffee and tried to hide her anxiety while the sheriff explained his concerns. There had been questions, he said diplomatically. People were wondering if it was appropriate for a young girl to be handling firearms, especially with the kind of skill that Carlos had described. "She's not hurting anyone, Sheriff," Miguel said carefully. "We're always careful about safety. Always. I'm sure you are, Miguel. But you understand my position. Maybe it would be better if Sarah focused on more traditional activities. The church youth group, maybe, or the school band." Sarah, who had been pretending to do homework at the dining room table, felt her world beginning to crumble. The one thing that made her feel alive, the one activity where she felt truly herself, was about to be taken away because it made other people uncomfortable. That night, after Sheriff Bradley left and her parents had gone to bed, Sarah lay staring at the ceiling and made a decision that would shape the rest of her life. She wouldn't give up shooting. She would get better at it. So much better that no one could ignore her
Steady now.
talent
Keep it
or
tight on the
dismiss
target.
it
Don't
as
flinch when you fire.
inappropriate for a girl. She would prove that excellence transcended gender. That skill was skill regardless of who possessed it. The next morning, Sarah approached her father with a proposal that surprised him with its maturity and forward thinking. She wanted to join the junior ROTC program when she reached high school. She wanted to learn everything she could about military history, tactics, and marksmanship. And she wanted his permission to dream bigger than Marfa, Texas, had ever allowed a girl to dream. Miguel looked at his daughter, seeing not just the determined 12-year-old who stood before him, but the woman she was becoming, strong, focused, and absolutely unwilling to be limited by other people's expectations. In that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. "Mija," he said, placing a weathered hand on her shoulder, "sometimes the most important promises we make are the ones we make to ourselves. If this is your dream, if this is what you truly want, then we'll find a way to make it happen. Together." Rosa overheard the conversation from the kitchen doorway. She wanted to object, to protect her daughter from a world that she knew would be harsh and unforgiving to a young woman with unconventional ambitions. But something in Sarah's voice, a quiet certainty that reminded her of her own younger self before life had taught her to dream smaller, stopped her from speaking. Instead, she joined her husband and daughter at the kitchen table and helped them plan Sarah's future. They researched military academies, ROTC programs, and marksmanship competitions. They discussed the challenges Sarah would face as a woman in a male-dominated field, and they strategized ways to overcome those obstacles. By the time Sarah entered high school 2 years later, she wasn't just the girl who could shoot. She was the girl with a plan, a purpose, and the unshakable conviction that her gender would be an asset, not a liability, in achieving her goals. She had no idea that her path would eventually lead to a meeting with a skeptical sergeant named Jay Collins and a Barrett .50 caliber rifle that would change both their lives forever. The desert had taught Sarah many things during her childhood, but perhaps the most important lesson was this: The horizon always looks impossible to reach until you start walking toward it. On the day she graduated from Marfa High School as valedictorian and the first student in the school's history to earn a full ROTC scholarship, Sarah Martinez began her walk toward a horizon that most people believed was reserved for men. She had no intention of proving them right. The first day at Fort Benning felt like stepping into another universe. Sarah Martinez had prepared herself for the physical challenges, the mental pressure, and the inevitable skepticism that would greet her arrival. What she hadn't anticipated was the suffocating weight of being the only woman in advanced individual training for Military Occupational Specialty 11B infantry. The barracks buzzed with nervous energy as 63 recruits from across the country tried to process what the next 16 weeks would bring. Sarah kept her head down and focused on organizing her gear with military precision, but she could feel the stares, hear the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she looked up. Some of the looks were curious, others dismissive, and a few were openly hostile. "Holy shit, they actually let girls in now?" she heard someone mutter from across the bay. Sarah continued folding her uniforms with mechanical precision, a skill she'd perfected during 4 years of ROTC. She'd learned that responding to every comment or challenge was a waste of energy that could be better spent proving her worth through actions rather than words. Drill Sergeant Michael Torres entered the barracks like a force of nature, his presence commanding immediate silence and attention. He was a compact man with piercing dark eyes and a voice that could cut through steel. Torres had been breaking down recruits and building them back up as soldiers for 12 years, and he took pride in his reputation as one of the toughest instructors at Benning. "Ladies and gentlemen," Torres announced, his eyes scanning the assembled recruits. "For the next 16 weeks, your previous life does not exist. Your mommy does not exist. Your girlfriend does not exist. Your comfort zone definitely does not exist. The only thing that matters is whether you have what it takes to earn the right to call yourself an infantry soldier." His gaze stopped on Sarah, and she felt the weight of his assessment. She met his stare without flinching, her expression neutral but determined. "Martinez," Torres barked. "Yes, drill sergeant." "Step forward." Sarah moved with crisp precision, stopping exactly 3 feet from Torres and assuming the position of attention. The barracks remained dead silent, 62 pairs of eyes watching this moment that would set the tone for everything that followed. "Martinez, do you know what infantry soldiers do?" "Yes, drill sergeant." "Infantry soldiers close with and destroy the enemy through fire and maneuver, drill sergeant." Torres walked slowly around Sarah, his eyes taking in every detail of her posture, her equipment, her demeanor. She was smaller than most of the male recruits, standing 5'6" with an athletic build that spoke of years of dedicated physical training. But there was something else, something in the way she carried herself that suggested an inner steel that couldn't be easily broken. "The infantry is not a game, Martinez. It's not a social experiment or a political statement. It's about life and death in the most basic terms imaginable. Do you understand that?" "Yes, drill sergeant." "Good, because from this moment forward, you will be held to the exact same standards as every other recruit in this platoon. No special treatment, no allowances, no excuses. Can you handle that?" "Yes, drill sergeant." Torres returned to his position in front of the platoon, but his message was clear to everyone present. Sarah Martinez would succeed or fail on her own merits, nothing more and nothing less. The first few weeks tested every assumption Sarah had ever made about her own limits. The physical training was relentless. 6-mile runs in full gear, obstacle courses that seemed designed by sadists, and endless hours of drill and ceremony under the unforgiving Georgia sun. But the mental challenges proved even more demanding. Infantry tactics required a completely different way of thinking about space, time, and human behavior. Sarah had to learn to read terrain like a book, understanding how every ridge, valley, and tree line could be used to advantage or disadvantage. She studied the principles of fire and maneuver until she could recite them in her sleep, and She memorized weapon specifications with the dedication of a scholar pursuing a doctoral degree. Her first real test came during the 4th week of training, during a live-fire exercise that separated the natural soldiers from those who were simply going through the motions. The exercise involved advancing under fire while engaging targets at various distances with the M4 carbine, a weapon that Sarah had never fired before arriving at Benning. The other recruits had struggled with the exercise throughout the morning, most managing to hit only 3 or 4 of the 10 targets while advancing under simulated enemy fire. The course required split-second decision-making, precise marksmanship under stress, and the ability to move tactically while maintaining situational awareness. When Sarah's turn came, she approached the starting line with the same quiet focus that had characterized her performance throughout training. Torres positioned himself where he could observe every movement, curious to see how the only female recruit would handle the pressure. The exercise began with the sharp crack of blank ammunition being fired over Sarah's head to simulate enemy fire. Most recruits instinctively ducked and moved tentatively through the course. Sarah did something different. She moved with fluid precision, using cover and concealment like a seasoned veteran, her rifle always ready, her eyes constantly scanning for threats and opportunities. At the first firing position, she dropped into a perfect prone position behind a log barrier and engaged 3 targets at 200 meters. All 3 targets fell in rapid succession, her shots placed with surgical precision in the center mass scoring zone. She rose and moved to the next position, her footwork economical and purposeful. By the time Sarah reached the final firing position, Torres was no longer just observing. He was studying. This wasn't beginner's luck or accident. This was natural ability combined with serious preparation and an intuitive understanding of tactical movement that he rarely saw in experienced soldiers, let alone recruits. Sarah's final 3 shots were fired from an unsupported standing position at targets 150 meters away. The targets were partially concealed behind barriers, requiring her to time her shots for the brief moments when the scoring zones were exposed. She fired 3 times in rapid succession, and 3 targets fell. Perfect score. No misses. Completed in record time. The range fell silent except for the distant sound of artillery training on another part of the base. Torres approached Sarah's position, his expression unreadable. "Martinez, what was your previous shooting experience?" "Small-bore rifles, drill sergeant. Hunting and informal target practice." "Who taught you to move tactically?" "No one, drill sergeant. I studied the manuals and tried to apply the principles logically." Torres studied Sarah for a long moment, recognizing something that he'd seen only a handful of times in his career. Some people were natural athletes. Others were natural scholars. Very rarely, he encountered someone who was a natural soldier, someone for whom the complexities of tactics, marksmanship, and battlefield awareness came as instinctively as breathing. Word of Sarah's performance spread quickly through the training company. Some of her fellow recruits began to look at her with new respect, while others seemed threatened by her success. The divide created a tension that Torres recognized as both potentially destructive and possibly beneficial to the platoon's overall development. 3 recruits in particular seemed to take Sarah's success as a personal challenge. Johnson, a former high school football player from Alabama, had arrived at Benning convinced that his size and strength would make infantry training relatively easy. Williams, who had grown up hunting in the mountains of Montana, considered himself an expert marksman. Rodriguez, the son of a career Marine, believed his family military background gave him advantages that couldn't be matched by outsiders. The 3 began to form an informal alliance, finding subtle ways to make Sarah's training more difficult. They would accidentally bump into her during formation, causing her to stumble. They would take longer than necessary in the shower facilities, forcing her to rush through her personal hygiene routine. Most significantly, they began to question her performance, suggesting loudly that her shooting scores were the result of favorable conditions or instructor bias. Sarah endured these challenges without complaint, understanding that responding would only escalate the situation and potentially undermine her standing with the drill instructors. But she also began to prepare for the inevitable confrontation that would determine whether she would be accepted as a legitimate member of the platoon or forever marked as an outsider who didn't belong. The confrontation came during the 8th week of training, during a field exercise that tested everything the recruits had learned about patrolling, navigation, and small unit tactics. The exercise involved a 3-day mission in the woods surrounding Fort Benning, with recruits operating in squads of 8 under minimal instructor supervision. Sarah found herself assigned to a squad led by Johnson, with Williams and Rodriguez as her immediate teammates. The mission required the squad to navigate to a series of objectives while avoiding enemy forces played by more senior students, gather intelligence at each location, and return to base camp within 72 hours. From the beginning, it was clear that Johnson intended to use the exercise to prove that Sarah was a liability rather than an asset. He assigned her to the least favorable position in the patrol formation, gave her the heaviest equipment to carry, and excluded her from tactical discussions about how to approach each objective. The first day proceeded without major incident, though Sarah noticed that her squad mates seemed more interested in demonstrating their own competence than in completing the mission effectively. They moved carelessly through the woods, made unnecessary noise, and failed to maintain proper interval between team members. The second day brought their first contact with the opposing force. Sarah spotted the ambush first, recognizing the unnatural positioning of vegetation that concealed enemy positions. She attempted to alert Johnson through hand signals, but he ignored her warnings and led the squad directly into the trap. The ambush was devastating. Within seconds, 5 of the 8 squad members were declared killed by the exercise referees, leaving only Sarah, Williams, and Rodriguez as effective combatants. Johnson, as squad leader, was among the casualties, leaving tactical command to Williams as the senior remaining member. Williams found himself in command of a squad that had lost most of its personnel and was pinned down by enemy fire from multiple directions. The standard tactical response would have been to withdraw and call for support, but the exercise parameters made that impossible. Success would require aggressive action based on perfect tactical execution. Sarah studied the enemy positions for several minutes before approaching Williams with a plan that was both audacious and tactically sound. If she could reach a position on the high ground to the left flank, she could engage the enemy from an unexpected angle while Williams and Rodriguez provided suppressive fire from their current position. "No way," Williams said immediately. "That's a suicide run. You'll be completely exposed." "Only for about 30 seconds, Sarah replied calmly. "And they won't expect anyone to attempt that approach. It's doable if we time it right." Williams looked at the terrain again, recognizing the tactical merit of Sarah's plan, but reluctant to commit to something that seemed impossible to execute. Rodriguez suggested a more conservative approach that would take longer but involved less risk. Sarah listened to the debate for 2 minutes before making a decision that would define her relationship with her fellow soldiers for the rest of training. Without waiting for approval, she began moving toward the flanking position, using every piece of cover and concealment available while Williams and Rodriguez continued to argue about alternatives. Her movement was spotted by the opposing force, but by then it was too late. Sarah had reached the high ground and could see all 3 enemy positions clearly. She engaged each target in rapid succession, her simulated fire coordinated perfectly with the covering fire provided by Williams and Rodriguez. The entire engagement lasted less than 5 minutes. When the referees declared the exercise complete, Sarah's squad had successfully defeated a larger enemy force and completed their objective through aggressive action and superior tactical execution. That evening, around a small campfire in their temporary base camp, the dynamic within the squad had changed fundamentally. Johnson, despite being killed early in the action, acknowledged that Sarah's tactical plan had been the difference between mission success and failure. Williams admitted that her marksmanship and movement skills were superior to anything he had demonstrated. Rodriguez, perhaps most importantly, began asking Sarah technical questions about shooting and tactics, treating her as a valuable source of knowledge rather than an unwelcome intrusion. The final weeks of infantry training proceeded with a new sense of mutual respect and cooperation. Sarah had proven herself not just as an individual soldier, but as a teammate who could be trusted in high-pressure situations. More importantly, she had demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking and natural leadership that marked her as someone with the potential for advanced specialized training. When graduation day arrived, Sarah Martinez ranked second in her class academically and first in marksmanship. But the statistics didn't capture the most significant achievement of her 16 weeks at Fort Benning. She had transformed a platoon of skeptical male recruits into believers, not through political arguments or social pressure, but through consistent demonstration of superior soldiering skills. Drill Sergeant Torres pulled Sarah aside after the graduation ceremony, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "Martinez, you have orders for advanced training at Fort Benning. Sniper school. Do you know what that means?" Sarah felt her heart rate accelerate, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, Drill Sergeant. It means I'll have the opportunity to develop specialized skills in long-range precision marksmanship and reconnaissance." "It means a lot more than that," Torres said quietly. "Sniper school has a washout rate of over 70%. The instructors will test every assumption you've ever made about your own capabilities. And some of them won't want you there simply because you're a woman." Sarah nodded, understanding both the warning and the opportunity it represented. "Drill Sergeant, can I ask you a question?" "Go ahead. Do you think I have what it takes?" Torres was quiet for a long moment, considering not just Sarah's performance over the past 16 weeks, but what he knew about the psychological and technical demands of sniper training. "Martinez, in 12 years of training infantry soldiers, I've met maybe half a dozen who had the combination of technical skill, mental toughness, and tactical instincts necessary for advanced marksmanship training. You're one of them. Whether that's enough will depend on how badly you want it and how much you're willing to sacrifice to get it." 3 weeks later, Sarah Martinez reported to the U.S. Army Sniper School at Fort Benning, carrying everything she owned in a single duffel bag and a determination that had been forged in the desert of West Texas and tempered in the training grounds of Georgia. She had no idea that she was about to meet an instructor named Sergeant J. Collins who would challenge every assumption she had ever made about excellence, competition, and the true meaning of earning respect through performance. Sergeant J. Collins had seen enough failure to recognize it before it happened. In his 15 years as a sniper instructor at Fort Benning, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to identify the candidates who would wash out of the program before they fired their first shot. The nervous fidgeting, the overcomplicated questions, the desperate need to impress. These were the tells that separated the pretenders from the genuine operators. When Sarah Martinez walked into the briefing room for the first day of sniper school, Collins sized her up with the practiced eye of a man who had learned to trust his instincts. She was smaller than he expected, probably 140 pounds soaking wet, with calloused hands that suggested serious training experience, and eyes that didn't dart around the room seeking approval or validation. She found a seat in the middle of the room, organized her materials with mechanical precision, and waited for instruction with the kind of patient focus that Collins recognized, but rarely saw in new students. Still, she was a woman in a program that had never successfully graduated a female sniper. Collins had nothing against women in the military. His sister was a helicopter pilot who had flown combat missions in Iraq, but sniper training was different. It required not just marksmanship skills, but the ability to remain motionless for hours in hostile territory, to kill with clinical precision at distances where the target remained a human being rather than an anonymous silhouette, and to make life and death decisions under pressure that would break most people's minds. The statistics supported his skepticism. Of the 247 candidates who had entered sniper training during Collins' tenure as an instructor, only 71 had successfully graduated. Not one had been female, despite several attempts by candidates with impressive infantry credentials. The program simply demanded too much from a human mind and body to allow for any weaknesses, physical or psychological. Collins began the first day with his standard intimidation briefing, a carefully crafted presentation designed to weed out candidates who lacked the mental toughness for advanced training. He dimmed the lights and began showing photographs from actual sniper operations, images that captured the reality of what snipers were asked to do in service of their country. "Ladies and gentlemen," Collins announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had done everything he was asking these candidates to learn, "sniper training is not about becoming a better marksman. Any competent infantry soldier can learn to hit targets at 600 meters with sufficient practice. What we do here is create human beings capable of surgical violence at distances where you can see your target's face clearly enough to recognize them in a photograph." He clicked to the next slide, showing a bullet impact on a distant target. The precision was absolute, the result of calculations involving wind speed, temperature, humidity, range, and a dozen other variables that had to be processed instantly under combat conditions. Every shot you take in combat will be observed by the enemy. Miss, and you compromise not only your own position, but potentially the lives of the soldiers you're supporting. The margin for error is zero. The pressure is unlike anything you have experienced in your military career to this point. Collins watched the faces of his students as he continued the briefing, noting which ones remained focused and which began to show signs of doubt or anxiety. Sarah Martinez sat motionless throughout the presentation, her expression neutral but attentive, taking notes with the methodical approach of a serious student. The first phase of training involved classroom instruction that was as demanding as any graduate-level course. Students learned advanced ballistics, meteorology, range estimation, and target analysis. They studied the physics of bullet flight in detail that would make university professors envious, learning to calculate the effects of atmospheric pressure, temperature gradients, and Earth's rotation on projectile trajectories. Sarah thrived in the academic environment, demonstrating not just the ability to memorize complex formulas, but to understand the underlying principles well enough to adapt them to changing conditions. While other students struggled with the mathematical components of ballistic calculation, Sarah seemed to intuitively grasp the relationships between variables that determine bullet performance at extreme ranges. Collins noticed her academic excellence, but remained skeptical about her practical applications. Classroom knowledge and field performance were entirely different challenges, and he had seen too many brilliant students fail when confronted with the physical and psychological demands of actual shooting. The first practical test came during the third week of training, when students were introduced to the M24 sniper weapon system, a bolt-action rifle capable of precision shots at distances up to 800 meters. The initial familiarization involved shooting from supported positions at known distances, designed to establish baseline marksmanship capabilities and identify fundamental skill deficiencies. Collins positioned himself behind Sarah as she prepared for her first shot, curious to see how her theoretical knowledge would translate to practical application. She approached the rifle with obvious respect, checking and double-checking every adjustment before settling into her shooting position. Her form was textbook perfect: body alignment, breathing control, sight picture, trigger control. But form meant nothing if it didn't produce results. Collins had seen countless candidates with beautiful technique who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn when pressure was applied. Sarah's first shot struck the 10 ring of the target at 300 meters, a solid performance, but not exceptional. Her second shot was also in the 10 ring, as was her third. After 10 shots, she had produced a group that measured 1.2 inches, well within the standard expected for experienced shooters. "Not bad, Martinez," Collins said, trying to keep any surprise out of his voice. "But we're just getting started." Over the following days, the difficulty increased exponentially. Distances were extended to 500, then 600, then 800 meters. Wind conditions became more challenging. Time limits were imposed. Students were required to make first-round hits on targets that represented human-sized threats at ranges where the margin for error measured in fractions of an inch. Sarah continued to perform at a level that impressed her classmates and gradually gained Colin's grudging respect. She approached each new challenge with systematic preparation, studying the environmental conditions, calculating the necessary adjustments, and executing her shots with mechanical precision. But Collins had seen good shooters before. What separated snipers from mere marksmen was the ability to perform under stress, to maintain precision when lives depended on the outcome, and to function effectively in field conditions that challenged every assumption about controlled shooting environments. The real test came during the 6th week of training, when students were introduced to what Collins called reality-based scenarios, shooting problems designed to simulate the psychological pressure and physical demands of actual combat operations. The first scenario involved a simulated hostage situation. Students were required to engage multiple targets at varying distances within strict time constraints, with the added psychological pressure of knowing that mistakes could theoretically result in civilian casualties. The targets were designed to represent both legitimate threats and innocent bystanders, requiring split-second decision-making about which shots to take and which to pass up. Sarah studied the scenario for the permitted 5 minutes, using a spotting scope to analyze each target position and calculate the shooting solutions for multiple engagement options. When the exercise began, she moved through the shooting positions with fluid efficiency, engaging threats in order of priority while avoiding civilian targets with margins that impressed even Collins. Her performance was flawless, every threat eliminated with single, precisely placed shots, no civilian casualties, completed well within the time limit. Collins made a note in her file that would have surprised her. Demonstrates exceptional decision-making under pressure. Natural tactical instincts. But the scenario that truly captured Collins' attention came during the 8th week, when students were tested on their ability to make precision shots after physical exertion that simulated the stress of extended field operations. The exercise required candidates to complete a 2-mile forced march in full gear, followed immediately by a shooting problem that demanded sub-MOA accuracy at 700 meters. Most students struggle with this test because the physical exertion elevated heart rate and breathing patterns to levels that made precision shooting extremely difficult. The key was not just physical fitness, but the ability to rapidly transition from high-stress activity to the absolute calm required for long-range marksmanship. Sarah completed the forced march in the 2nd fastest time among all students, arriving at the shooting position with elevated breathing, but no visible signs of distress. Collins watched as she immediately began her pre-shot routine, using breathing techniques to lower her heart rate, while simultaneously reading environmental conditions and calculating shooting solutions. Her first shot was a perfect center hit. Her second shot was also center. After 5 rounds, she had produced a group that measured 0.7 inches at 700 meters, a level of precision that Collins had seen achieved only by the most exceptional candidates in the program's history. "Jesus," whispered another instructor who had been observing the exercise. "I've never seen shooting like that from a student." Collins remained outwardly composed, but privately he was beginning to reassess his assumptions about Sarah Martinez. This wasn't just good shooting. This was the kind of natural ability that appeared perhaps once in a decade, combined with preparation and mental toughness that suggested genuine elite potential. The psychological evaluation component of sniper training was designed to identify candidates who might break under the stress of actually killing another human being. The evaluation involved extensive interviews, psychological testing, and scenario-based assessments that probed each candidate's ability to make life and death decisions without hesitation or subsequent trauma. Sarah approached the psychological evaluation with the same systematic preparation she brought to every other aspect of training. She had read extensively about the psychological demands of sniping, understood the ethical and moral complexities involved, and had thought seriously about her ability to take human life when tactically necessary. The evaluating psychologist was Dr. Rebecca Chun, a clinical specialist who had developed the assessment protocols used throughout the Army's Special Operations community. Dr. Chun had evaluated hundreds of candidates for various high-stress military occupations and had developed an uncanny ability to identify psychological strengths and weaknesses that might not become apparent until after soldiers were deployed in combat situations. Tell me about your motivation for pursuing sniper training. Dr. Chun began, studying Sarah's file while maintaining the kind of neutral expression that revealed nothing about her initial impressions. I want to develop specialized skills that will make me more effective in supporting infantry operations, Sarah replied. Snipers serve as force multipliers, providing precision fires, reconnaissance, and overwatch capabilities that can significantly impact mission success. The answer was technically correct, but somewhat scripted, the kind of response Dr. Chun had heard from dozens of candidates who had memorized appropriate talking points without necessarily understanding the deeper implications of their choice. That's what the manual says, Dr. Chun observed. Tell me what you think, not what you've read. Sarah considered the question for several seconds before responding, recognizing that honesty was more important than saying what she thought the evaluator wanted to hear. I think I have natural abilities that are well suited for precision marksmanship, and I want to develop those abilities to their full potential in service of something larger than myself. I understand that snipers sometimes have to kill people, and I've thought seriously about whether I can do that when it's necessary. I believe I can, but I recognize that I won't know for certain until I'm actually faced with that situation. Dr. Chin made notes while Sarah spoke, appreciating the thoughtful and realistic assessment that avoided both false bravado and naive idealism. Have you ever killed anything before? Yes. I grew up hunting, and I've had to put down injured animals. I understand that killing a human being would be different, but I don't think it would be impossible for me if it was tactically necessary and legally justified. The interview continued for 2 hours, covering topics ranging from Sarah's childhood experiences with violence to her philosophical views on the use of lethal force in military operations. Dr. Chun probed for signs of psychological instability, excessive aggression, or emotional detachment that might indicate problems with judgment or impulse control. What she found instead was a young woman with exceptional emotional intelligence, clear moral reasoning, and the kind of psychological resilience that suggested she could handle high-stress situations without losing her fundamental humanity. Dr. Chin's final assessment, which would become part of Sarah's permanent military record, included observations that would prove remarkably prescient. Candidate demonstrates exceptional psychological stability and moral reasoning. Shows no signs of excessive aggression or emotional detachment. Likely to perform well under stress while maintaining appropriate ethical constraints. Recommend for continued training without reservation. By the 10th week of the program, the class had been reduced from 24 students to 8. The washout rate was running higher than normal, partly because the summer heat made outdoor training more challenging, but primarily because Collins and his fellow instructors had identified an unusually high percentage of candidates who lacked the fundamental psychological or technical capabilities for sniper operations. Sarah remained among the top performers academically and had consistently demonstrated superior marksmanship skills throughout the training progression. But Collins knew that the most challenging tests still lay ahead, including field exercises that would test everything the candidates had learned under conditions that closely simulated actual combat operations. The field exercise that would ultimately determine who graduated and who went home was scheduled for the final 2 weeks of the program. Students would operate independently for extended periods in realistic field conditions, engaging targets of opportunity while avoiding detection by opposing forces. Success required not just marksmanship skills, but also expertise in fieldcraft, camouflage, navigation, and tactical movement. Collins announced the exercise parameters on a Monday morning that felt like stepping into a furnace. The temperature was already approaching 90 degrees at 0800 hours, with humidity levels that made physical exertion almost unbearable. Conditions would only get worse as the day progressed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Collins began, his voice carrying the gravity that marked this as the most important briefing the candidates would receive. For the next 14 days, you will operate as snipers in realistic field conditions. You will be provided with mission parameters, but you will plan and execute those missions independently. You will be evaluated not just on your shooting performance, but on your ability to function as a complete sniper system. He paused to let the implications sink in before continuing. Some of you will discover that classroom knowledge and range performance don't automatically translate to field effectiveness. Others will find that the psychological pressure of independent operations reveals limitations that weren't apparent during previous training. A few of you may discover that you have capabilities that even you didn't know existed. Colin's eyes briefly met Sarah's as he finished the briefing, and she recognized both challenge and opportunity in his expression. This was her chance to prove that everything she had demonstrated during the previous 10 weeks was real, sustainable, and applicable to the most demanding situations she might face as a military sniper. She had no way of knowing that in 3 days, she would find herself in a position that would test every skill she had ever developed, facing a shot that would determine not only her graduation from sniper school, but also her future reputation as one of the most capable precision marksmen the military had ever produced. The Barrett M82.50 caliber rifle weighed 32 pounds and measured nearly 5 feet in length. It was designed to destroy vehicles, penetrate armored positions, and engage targets at distances where conventional rifles became ineffective. The weapon's massive cartridge produced more energy than most people experienced in their entire military careers, and its recoil was legendary for dislocating shoulders and breaking bones of shooters who didn't respect its power. Sergeant Jake Collins had never allowed a student to fire the Barrett during basic sniper training. The weapon was reserved for advanced courses and special operations units whose members had already proven themselves capable of handling conventional precision rifles with absolute competence. The Barrett wasn't just a bigger rifle. It was an entirely different category of weapon that demanded specialized knowledge, extraordinary physical strength, and mental toughness that went far beyond normal sniper requirements. But the field exercise had taken an unexpected turn that changed everything Collins thought he knew about training protocols and student limitations. The scenario had begun 3 days earlier as a routine test of fieldcraft and marksmanship skills. 8 remaining candidates were assigned individual missions that required them to move through designated areas, establish concealed firing positions, and engage multiple targets while avoiding detection by opposing forces. The exercise was designed to test everything they had learned during 10 weeks of intensive training under conditions that closely simulated actual combat operations. Sarah had drawn what Collins considered the most challenging assignment, a mission that required her to traverse 3 miles of dense Georgia forest, establish a firing position within 1,000 meters of a target complex, and engage 5 targets at ranges between 600 and 900 meters. The opposing force consisted of experienced soldiers from the base's infantry training unit, men who understood camouflage, movement detection, and counter-sniper tactics. For the first 2 days, Sarah had performed flawlessly. She had moved through the forest like a ghost, using natural cover and disciplined route selection to avoid detection while closing to within optimal range of her targets. Her shooting had been surgical. 5 targets engaged, 5 targets eliminated, all with single shots that demonstrated both precision and confidence. Collins had been monitoring her progress through a combination of direct observation and electronic tracking devices that allowed instructors to maintain situational awareness without interfering with the training scenario. By the afternoon of the 3rd day, he was prepared to recommend her for graduation with distinction, a recognition reserved for fewer than 10% of successful candidates. Then, everything changed. The radio call came at 1,347 hours, delivered in the matter-of-fact tone that military professionals use to convey information that was both urgent and potentially catastrophic. Control, this is Bravo 6. We have a situation that requires immediate sniper support. Real world, not exercise. Collins felt his stomach drop. Real world meant that something had happened that transcended training scenarios and entered the realm of actual emergency response. At Fort Benning, they usually meant either a training accident with serious injuries or a security situation that required specialized tactical response. Bravo 6, this is Control. Send your traffic. Control, we have a hostage situation at Building 348. Armed subject has barricaded himself with 2 civilian personnel. Subject is threatening to kill hostages unless his demands are met. Request immediate sniper support for potential intervention. Building 348 was an administrative facility located approximately 1,200 meters from Sarah's current position. The distance was at the extreme range of conventional sniper rifles, but potentially manageable with the Barrett system that Collins had brought to the exercise area for demonstration purposes. Collins grabbed his radio and contacted the Base Tactical Operations Center, confirming that all qualified snipers were either deployed, unavailable, or too distant to respond within the critical time window. The hostage situation was developing rapidly, and tactical commanders needed a precision option within the next 30 minutes. The decision Collins made next would be questioned, analyzed, and debated for years afterward. According to every regulation and training protocol, he should have declined the mission and recommended alternative tactical approaches. No student, regardless of performance level, was authorized to engage in actual combat operations using weapon systems they had not been fully trained to employ. But Collins had spent 15 years developing an instinct for recognizing exceptional ability under pressure. He had watched Sarah Martinez perform under increasingly difficult conditions for 10 weeks, and he had seen her demonstrate not just marksmanship skills, but the kind of tactical judgment and psychological stability that couldn't be taught or faked. More importantly, he understood that time was the critical factor. Every minute of delay increased the probability that hostages would be killed and a dangerous situation would escalate beyond any possibility of peaceful resolution. Collins made a decision that violated every standard protocol, but aligned with his professional judgment about capabilities, necessities, and acceptable risk levels. He contacted Sarah through the secure radio system that connected all exercise participants. Student 7, this is Control. Return immediately to control position for mission modification. Expedite. Sarah had been preparing for her next target engagement when the recall order arrived. She secured her equipment and began moving toward the control position with the efficient urgency that characterized all her actions. Something in Collins' tone suggested that this was not a routine training adjustment. She reached the control position 22 minutes later, moving faster than Collins had thought possible through terrain that normally required 40 minutes to traverse. She was breathing hard but remained alert and ready for whatever instruction awaited her. Collins briefed Sarah on the hostage situation with the clinical precision of a military professional delivering mission-critical information. He explained the tactical situation, the time constraints, the limitations of available resources, and the potential consequences of action or inaction. This is not a training scenario, he emphasized. This is a real situation with real people whose lives are at risk. I am asking you to consider attempting a shot that is at the limit of what any sniper system can accomplish, using a weapon you have never fired, under pressure that exceeds anything you have experienced in your military career. Sarah listened to the briefing with complete focus, asking clarifying questions about wind conditions, target description, and rules of engagement. She understood both the tactical requirements and the broader implications of what Collins was proposing. Sergeant, what's the distance to target? 1,184 meters. Outside effective range for the M24 system you've been trained on. What weapon system are you proposing? Collins paused before answering, knowing that his next words would either inspire confidence or create doubt that could undermine the entire mission. The Barrett M82 .50 caliber system. You've seen it demonstrated but never fired it. Sarah was quiet for several seconds, processing the technical and tactical implications of attempting a precision shot at that distance with an unfamiliar weapon system. The mathematical challenges alone were daunting. Calculating bullet drop, wind drift, and environmental effects at ranges where minor errors in estimation could result in misses measured in feet rather than inches. "Sergeant, what do you think? Can it be done?" Collins looked at Sarah Martinez, seeing not the uncertain recruit who had arrived at Fort Benning 16 weeks earlier, but a soldier who had consistently exceeded every expectation and demonstrated capabilities that transcended normal training outcomes. "I think you have a better chance of making this shot than anyone else currently available," he said quietly. "But I also think it's at the limit of what's physically possible, regardless of skill level. The margin for error is essentially zero." Sarah nodded, understanding both the technical challenge and the human responsibility that came with it. If she missed, the hostage situation would continue to deteriorate, and other tactical options would have to be implemented that carried their own risks and potential consequences. "I'll take the shot," she said simply. Collins led Sarah to the Barrett rifle position he had established earlier as part of the weapon systems demonstration. The massive rifle was already mounted on a bipod system and equipped with a high-magnification scope capable of target identification at extreme ranges. This weapon produces approximately 5 times the recoil energy of the M24, Collins explained as Sarah examined the Barrett system. "The trigger pull is different, the sight picture is different, and the sound signature will be unlike anything you've experienced. You get one shot, maybe two if circumstances permit, but probably just one." Sarah studied the Barrett with the systematic approach she brought to every new technical challenge. She examined the scope adjustments, tested the trigger mechanism, and positioned herself behind the rifle to understand how its size and weight would affect her shooting position. The radio crackled with updates from the hostage situation. The armed subject was becoming increasingly agitated, and negotiators were running out of options for peaceful resolution. Time was becoming the enemy of everyone involved. Sarah began her shooting preparation with methodical precision that impressed Collins despite the pressure of the situation. She used a laser rangefinder to confirm the distance to the target building, analyzed wind conditions using all available environmental indicators, and calculated the shooting solution using formulas she had memorized during weeks of intensive academic training. The mathematics were complex. At 1,184 meters, the .50 caliber projectile would drop approximately 47 inches below the line of sight, assuming standard atmospheric conditions. But the actual conditions included a 15-mile-per-hour crosswind, elevated temperature, and humidity levels that would affect bullet performance in ways that required adjustments measured in fractions of degrees. Sarah made her calculations twice, then had Collins verify her work using independent methods. Both calculations produced the same shooting solution, but they both understood that mathematical precision and field reality were often separated by variables that couldn't be quantified or predicted. The target was positioned in a second-floor window of Building 348, partially concealed by window frames that limited the available shooting angle to a space approximately 18 inches wide and 12 inches tall. The hostage-taker was using one of the civilian hostages as a human shield, further reducing the margin for error to dimensions that challenged the limits of human precision. Sarah settled into her final shooting position with the Barrett rifle, making minute adjustments to align her body, the weapon, and the target in optimal relationship. The rifle felt different from anything she had fired before. Heavier, more powerful, with a scope image that revealed details at 1,184 meters that seemed impossibly clear and immediate. Through the scope, she could see the target's face clearly enough to distinguish individual features. He was a young man, probably early 20s, with the kind of desperate expression that suggested mental instability rather than calculated criminal intent. The hostage visible in the window was a woman who appeared to be in her 50s, held in position by an arm around her throat that put her directly in the line of fire. The tactical challenge was not just hitting a target at extreme range, but placing the shot with surgical precision that would neutralize the threat without endangering the hostage, who was positioned inches away from the intended impact point. Sarah controlled her breathing and began the mental sequence that she had practiced thousands of times during training. She cleared her mind of everything except the immediate requirements of the shot: sight alignment, trigger control, environmental compensation, and the technical execution of delivering a projectile to a specific point in space with absolute precision. The crosshairs settled on the target with the kind of stability that comes from perfect position, controlled breathing, and complete mental focus. Sarah began the trigger squeeze that would either save lives or create a tragedy that would haunt her forever. The Barrett rifle discharged with a sound like thunder, producing a muzzle blast that temporarily deafened everyone in the immediate area. The recoil drove Sarah backward with force that would have injured a less prepared shooter, but her position and technique absorbed the impact without disrupting her ability to observe the shot's outcome. At 1,184 meters, the bullet's flight time was approximately 1.8 seconds, an eternity when lives hung in the balance. Sarah maintained her scope picture throughout the recoil sequence, waiting to observe the impact that would determine whether her calculation and execution had been sufficient for the most challenging shot of her life. The projectile struck exactly where she had aimed, impacting the target's head with devastating effect while leaving the hostage completely unharmed. The precision was absolute, the result of calculations and execution that had functioned flawlessly under pressure that would have broken most people's ability to perform. Radio confirmation came within seconds. Control, this is Bravo 6. Target is down. Hostages are secure and uninjured. Outstanding shot. Request identity of sniper for commendation purposes. Collins looked at Sarah, who was still positioned behind the Barrett rifle. Her expression calm despite having just accomplished something that most snipers considered impossible. She had made a shot that would be discussed in military circles for years, using a weapon she had never fired before, under pressure that exceeded anything in her previous experience. "Well done, Martinez," Collins said quietly. "That was the finest piece of shooting I've ever witnessed." Sarah secured the Barrett rifle and began the post-shot procedures that were second nature after weeks of training. But she was also processing the emotional and psychological reality of what had just occurred. She had taken a human life, something she had prepared for intellectually, but never experienced personally. "Sergeant," she said after several minutes of silence, "was that really the only option?" Collins considered the question seriously, understanding that Sarah was processing not just the technical success of her shot, but the moral and ethical implications of having killed another human being. Based on the information available and the time constraints involved, yes, it was probably the only option that could have prevented the hostages from being killed, he replied. "You made a decision that saved innocent lives. That's what snipers do when the situation requires it." The radio call that came 30 minutes later would change Sarah's life forever, though she had no way of knowing it at the time. "Control, this is Base Command. Request immediate report to headquarters for debrief and commendation. Student 7 is to be accompanied by primary instructor for immediate consultation regarding accelerated training opportunities." Collins looked at Sarah with an expression that combined professional respect with something approaching awe. "Martinez, I've been wrong about a lot of things in my career, but I've never been more wrong about anything than I was about you. You're not just a competent sniper. You're something special, something that appears maybe once in a generation." As they walked toward the headquarters building, Collins made a decision that would alter the trajectory of Sarah's military career. He was going to recommend her not just for graduation, but for immediate assignment to the military's most elite sniper units, where her extraordinary abilities could be developed to their full potential in service of the most challenging missions the military faced. He had handed her the Barrett .50 caliber rifle, expecting to demonstrate the difference between good shooting and exceptional demands. Instead, she had shown him the difference between competence and genius, between training and natural gift that transcended normal human limitations. The girl from Marfa Texas, had become something more than anyone had thought possible, including herself. The Pentagon briefing room fell silent as General Patricia Hayes finished reading the after-action report. She set the document down and looked across the polished conference table at Sergeant Jake Collins, who sat uncomfortably in his dress uniform, still processing the events that had brought him to the highest levels of military command. "Sergeant Collins," General Hayes began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 30 years making decisions that affected thousands of lives. "I want you to walk me through this one more time." A female student who had never fired the Barrett system, made a precision shot at nearly 1,200 meters under combat conditions and successfully resolved a hostage situation with 0 casualties. Collins had been answering variations of the same question for 3 days, ever since Sarah Martinez had accomplished what military analysts were calling the most remarkable piece of marksmanship in recent Army history. The shot had been analyzed by ballistics experts, reviewed by tactical specialists, and studied by training commanders who were trying to understand how someone with Sarah's experience level had succeeded where veteran snipers might have failed. "Yes, ma'am." Student 7, Private Martinez, calculated and executed the shot with precision that exceeded anything I've witnessed in 15 years of sniper instruction. The environmental conditions were challenging, the time pressure was extreme, and the margin for error was essentially 0. She performed flawlessly. General Hayes consulted another document, this one containing Sarah's complete military record from her enlistment through her performance at sniper school. The progression was remarkable, consistently superior performance across every metric, but more importantly, demonstrated ability to exceed expectations under increasingly difficult conditions. "Sergeant, what's your professional assessment of Private Martinez's potential for advanced training and special operations?" Collins had spent considerable time thinking about that question over the past several days. His initial skepticism about female candidates had been completely overturned by Sarah's performance. But more than that, he had recognized something in her abilities that transcended normal categories and classifications. "Ma'am, in my opinion, Private Martinez represents the kind of natural ability that appears perhaps once in a decade. Her technical skills are exceptional, but her tactical judgment and psychological stability under pressure suggest potential for the most demanding missions the military faces. Recommendations? Immediate assignment to advanced sniper training with the most elite units available. She has demonstrated capabilities that should be developed to their full potential as quickly as possible." General Hayes made notes while Collins spoke, but her mind was already moving toward implementation of recommendations that would fast-track Sarah's career in unprecedented ways. The military had invested billions of dollars in developing training programs designed to produce exceptional soldiers. When natural ability of Sarah's caliber appeared, it was the military's responsibility to nurture and develop that gift for maximum effectiveness. "Sergeant Collins, you are hereby reassigned to oversee Private Martinez's advanced training personally. Your new assignment will involve developing a specialized curriculum that maximizes her abilities while preparing her for the most challenging missions Special Operations Command faces." Collins felt his career taking a turn that he had never anticipated. He had expected to finish his military service as a conventional sniper instructor, training competent soldiers for standard infantry support roles. Instead, he was being asked to help develop what might become one of the most capable precision marksmen in military history. "Ma'am, what kind of timeline are we discussing?" 6 months of intensive training, followed by operational assignments that will test her abilities under actual combat conditions. Private Martinez is about to become a very important asset for this military, Sergeant Collins. Your job is to make sure she's ready for whatever we ask her to do. 3,000 miles away, Sarah Martinez was experiencing culture shock that had nothing to do with geography and everything to do with the sudden transformation of her military career. 48 hours after making the shot that had saved 2 lives and changed her future, she found herself at the U.S. Army Special Operations Command Headquarters at Fort Bragg, surrounded by soldiers whose reputations were legendary throughout the military community. The advanced training program she had been assigned to was officially classified, but unofficially known as the Ghost Program, a specialized course designed to produce snipers capable of operating independently in the most challenging environments on Earth. Students learned not just advanced marksmanship, but survival skills, foreign languages, cultural intelligence, and tactical techniques that blurred the lines between conventional military operations and espionage. Major Robert Chun, the program director, had initially objected to including a student with Sarah's limited experience in training designed for soldiers with years of special operations background. But the orders had come from the highest levels of command, and Major Chin had learned to trust his superior's judgment about talent identification and development. Private Martinez, Major Chun began during her first briefing. You are here because you demonstrated exceptional ability under extraordinary circumstances. But I want to be clear about what that means and what it doesn't mean. You made one remarkable shot. That doesn't automatically qualify you for the kind of operations this program prepares soldiers to conduct. Sarah listened with the respectful attention she had learned during months of military training, but she also understood that Major Chun was establishing expectations that would determine her success or failure in the program. Major, I understand that I have a great deal to learn. I'm prepared to work harder than I've ever worked to develop whatever abilities I might have. Major Chin studied Sarah's file while she spoke, noting not just her recent achievement, but the consistent pattern of excellence that had characterized her performance throughout military training. The shot at Fort Benning had been exceptional, but it was the broader pattern of competence and improvement that suggested genuine elite potential. Private Martinez, this program has a washout rate of 85%. Students who succeed go on to missions that can't be discussed publicly and may involve years of deployment in locations that don't appear on any official maps. Are you prepared for that kind of commitment? Sarah thought about the question seriously, considering not just the professional implications, but the personal costs of a military career that would demand everything she had to give and more than she knew she possessed. Yes, sir. I believe this is what I'm meant to do. The next 6 months tested every assumption Sarah had ever made about her own limitations. The training went far beyond conventional sniper skills, incorporating elements of survival training, psychological conditioning, and technical education that transformed her from a competent soldier into something approaching a human weapon system. She learned to survive in Arctic conditions that would kill unprepared personnel within hours. She mastered urban warfare techniques that required split-second decision-making in environments filled with civilians. She studied foreign languages and cultural practices that would allow her to operate effectively in countries where discovery meant death or worse. But the most challenging component of training involves psychological conditioning designed to prepare her for the moral and emotional complexities of special operations. She learned to compartmentalize the human cost of her actions while maintaining the ethical framework that separated legitimate military operations from simple killing. Sergeant Jake Collins arrived at Fort Bragg during Sarah's 3rd month of training, bringing with him specialized knowledge and a perspective that proved invaluable for understanding her unique combination of abilities and limitations. His role evolved from instructor to mentor to something approaching a protective older brother who understood both her potential and the pressures that came with it. "How are you holding up?" Collins asked during one of their weekly evaluation sessions. "I'm learning things about myself that I didn't know existed," Sarah replied honestly. "Some days I feel like I can do anything. Other days I wonder if I'm in way over my head." Collins recognized the psychological challenges that came with rapid advancement and exceptional expectations. He had seen promising soldiers break under pressure that was less intense than what Sarah was experiencing daily. "Martinez, I've been watching you for 8 months now. You've never failed to exceed expectations when it mattered. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and remember that you've already proven yourself capable of performing under pressure that would break most people." The validation exercise that concluded Sarah's advanced training was classified at levels that prevented detailed discussion, but its general parameters involved a simulated mission in hostile territory with objectives that required every skill she had developed during the previous 6 months. Sarah operated alone for 2 weeks in a training environment designed to replicate the most challenging conditions special operations forces might encounter anywhere in the world. She navigated through territory controlled by opposing forces, gathered intelligence through direct observation and electronic surveillance, and ultimately completed her mission with precision that impressed even the most skeptical evaluators. The final component of the exercise was a shooting problem that required her to engage multiple targets at ranges between 800 and 1,400 meters while remaining undetected by hostile forces actively searching for her position. The technical difficulty was extreme, but the psychological pressure was equally challenging. She knew that successful completion of this exercise would determine her assignment to operational units, while failure would result in reassignment to conventional forces. Sarah moved into position during the pre-dawn hours of a cold November morning, establishing a concealed firing position that provided clear lines of sight to her assigned targets while offering multiple escape routes if her position was discovered. She had spent hours studying the terrain, calculating shooting solutions, and preparing equipment that would function flawlessly under the stress of actual engagement. The targets appeared on schedule, moving through predetermined routes that simulated realistic tactical scenarios. Sarah engaged each target in sequence, delivering precision shots at distances that challenged the limits of her weapon system while maintaining complete concealment from the opposing forces. Her shooting was flawless. Every target engaged was successfully neutralized with single shots that demonstrated both technical precision and tactical awareness. More importantly, she completed the exercise without compromising her position or alerting opposing forces to her presence. The radio call that ended the exercise came 12 minutes after her final shot. Ghost 7, this is Control. Exercise complete. All targets confirmed down. Outstanding performance. Return to base for debrief. Major Chun met Sarah at the extraction point, his expression revealing both professional satisfaction and genuine amazement at what she had accomplished during 6 months of the most demanding training the military offered. Private Martinez, congratulations. You have successfully completed advanced sniper training with distinction. Your performance has been exceptional across every evaluation metric. Sarah felt a combination of relief and pride that was quickly tempered by understanding that completion of training was just the beginning of what would be expected from her in the years ahead. Thank you, sir. What happens next? Major Chun consulted a classified document that contained Sarah's operational assignment, information that would determine where she spent the next several years and what kinds of missions she would be asked to undertake. You are hereby assigned to Joint Special Operations Command, with deployment pending based on operational requirements. Your specialization will involve precision marksmanship in support of counterterrorism operations worldwide. The assignment represented everything Sarah had worked towards since deciding to pursue military service, but it also carried implications that she was still learning to understand. She would be asked to operate in the most dangerous places on Earth, engaging threats that posed immediate dangers to American interests and innocent civilians. 6 weeks later, Sarah Martinez found herself on a military transport aircraft flying toward her first operational deployment, carrying equipment that represented the pinnacle of precision weaponry and wearing the uniform of one of the military's most elite units. She was 21 years old, the daughter of a ranch worker from a town most people had never heard of, and she was about to begin a career that would make her one of the most feared and respected snipers in modern military history. Sergeant Jay Collins had remained at Fort Bragg, where he was developing training protocols based on lessons learned from Sarah's exceptional progression through sniper school. His role had evolved from skeptical instructor to devoted mentor to something approaching a proud father watching his daughter achieve things he had never imagined possible. The phone call that would define the next phase of Sarah's legend came 3 months into her first deployment, when she was asked to attempt a shot that military analysts had deemed impossible with available technology and human limitations. Martinez, we have a situation that requires precision beyond anything in the tactical playbook, her commanding officer explained during a secure communication from a forward operating base in a country whose name appeared on no official records. There's a target that conventional weapons can't reach, but losing him means losing intelligence that could prevent attacks on American civilians. Sarah listened to the mission briefing with the focused attention that had become her trademark, understanding that she was being asked to push the boundaries of what human beings could accomplish with precision weapons. "What's the distance to target?" she asked. 2,000 meters. Outside the effective range of any weapon system we've used operationally. Sarah was quiet for several seconds, calculating the mathematical and technical challenges of a shot that exceeded anything she had attempted during training. "Ma'am, I'll need specialized equipment and perfect environmental conditions. And I'll need to spend time developing a shooting solution that accounts for variables we've never had to consider before." "You'll have whatever you need, Martinez. This mission has the highest priority classification." The shot that Sarah Martinez made 3 days later, using a custom-modified weapon system under conditions that challenged every assumption about the limits of precision marksmanship, would become the stuff of legend throughout the special operations community. The mathematical precision required was extraordinary, but the psychological pressure was even greater. She was operating alone in hostile territory, with the knowledge that success or failure would determine whether terrorist attacks against civilian targets were prevented or facilitated. When the shot was complete and the target confirmed eliminated, Sarah Martinez had established herself as something unique in military history. A precision marksman whose abilities transcended normal human limitations and whose service record would inspire generations of soldiers who followed in her footsteps. The girl from Marfa, Texas, who had learned to shoot tin cans in the desert, had become Ghost 7, a name whispered with respect and fear in intelligence circles around the world. She had proven that excellence knows no gender, that natural ability combined with dedication and proper training could overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes the most extraordinary achievements begin with someone simply being willing to try. Jake Collins received updates on Sarah's operational deployments through classified channels that revealed nothing about specific missions, but confirmed that her exceptional abilities were being utilized to their full potential in service of national security objectives that couldn't be discussed publicly. He kept a photograph on his desk that showed Sarah Martinez receiving her sniper badge after graduation from advanced training, and when young female recruits asked whether women could succeed in the most demanding military specialties, he would point to that photograph and tell them about the day he handed a Barrett .50 caliber rifle to a student who exceeded every expectation and redefined what was possible. "Her sniper badge left me stunned," Collins would tell those who asked about that moment. "Not because she earned it, but because I realized that everything I thought I knew about limitations was wrong." When you meet someone with that kind of natural gift and determination, your job isn't to test whether they can succeed. Your job is to help them discover how far excellence can take them. Sarah Martinez had discovered that excellence could take her further than anyone had imagined, including herself. The small-town girl with big dreams had become a legend, one precisely placed shot at a time.